Good morning. Welcome to The Human Author. My name is Jen Cantwell, and today I'm going to be working on the fifth book in my epic fantasy Light Chaser series, The Warning. If you'd like to learn more about the series, you can visit my author website at jbcantwell.com. Just a reminder that at the beginning of every dictation session, I read what I wrote the day before, so you can always just come for that first 10 or 15 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and get started, and we will get rocking. All right. We all entered the room, and Brennen immediately crawled into the bed, bashing his head against an ancient pillow. Kenneth headed straight to the window, pulling the curtain back an inch so he could see what was going on outside. "They're gone," he said, and I joined him at the ledge. "Gone?" "See for yourself," he said, backing away from the window. "Do you think it's safe to leave yet?" I asked, peering out at the square beyond. "No way," Brennan's voice came from. "I'm not going out there." Kenneth agreed. "I don't think it's time yet," he said. "It's only been hours since they left, and they might be hiding somewhere. If they are, we'll be dead before the day is through." I sat down on the edge of the bed, looking around the opulent room. Had this been the place where Varric had spent his nights? That fire made me think that yes, it had been. Still, the bed was tightly made. Brennen finally pulling back the covers and diving inside. I looked down at my boots, and I couldn't remember the last time I had them. "So they're gone, right?" I asked. Kenneth nodded. "For now." I reached down and pulled my boots off, then dove beneath the covers myself. I had never experienced the feeling of a fine bed, not even in the Veiled Kingdom. My bare feet pushed down into the bedding, and I found myself collapsing against the pillows beside Brennen. I yawned loudly. "Have you slept at all?" Kenneth asked. Had I? There had been stretches of time, black in my mind, but I couldn't remember the feeling of waking up. "I don't know," I said. "I don't think so." I looked over and found Brennan's eyes already closing. Finally, I consented to join him and pulled the covers all the way up to my chin. The mattress might have been centuries old, but it was more comfortable than anything I'd ever experienced. Finally, I let my eyes close as well, and it was only moments before sleep took me. Suddenly, I heard screaming, and my eyes flew open. I jumped out of the bed, only to find that night had fallen. I rushed up to the window. Kenneth stood watch. I walked up behind him and pulled on his shoulders until he was sitting on the floor, away from the window. "You need to hide," I said. "Don't you hear that?" He looked at me strangely, his face lit by the blue flame in the grate. "I don't hear anything," he said. I stopped, listening again, but I soon found that it was, in fact, silent. What had I heard? "You were talking in your sleep," Kenneth said. "Did you hear something?" I didn't answer him, simply putting my hands and shaking it back and forth. I was suddenly aware of the fact that my boots were still scattered on the floor. Immediately, I reached for them, stuffing them onto my feet, ready to run. "I heard screaming," I said. "I don't think I was dreaming. I think it was real." Kenneth looked out the window, his face doubtful. "I haven't seen or heard a thing for hours. You must have been dreaming. Come over, sit down." As the hours had passed, Kenneth had set himself up on the sofa beneath the window. There was just enough room, and I sat down, not sure if I was ready to believe him. Was my magic enough to hear things other people couldn't? I tried to think back to all of the times I'd met Torin in my dreams. This time, I hadn't seen his face at all, just darkness. And the screams, well, they'd propelled me into a panic. I glanced out the window, pulling the curtain back a couple of inches. I soon found that Kenneth was right. The Wicks were gone. "What does it mean?" Kenneth asked. "Is it a game?" I didn't know how to answer these questions. It certainly seemed that everything was a game to Torin. It was the only explanation for the fact that I hadn't seen him yet. "I don't know," I said, "but it's too soon for us to leave." "I think it's safe now for us to relax," he said. "Let's wait for the moon to set and then be on our way." I shook my head. "It's too soon. I don't trust it. It's quiet now, but they could easily be hiding." We can't stay here forever, he said. Just stay here with me. You'll be okay. At first, I resisted, but when he took my hand and pulled me down, I finally sat. I'm surprised by you, he said. What do you mean? I guess I always thought you were fearless back in the market, weren't you? How false this was. How might I have explained it? No, I said, not fearless. Were you? He scoffed. No, never. My father made me guard the stand at night starting when I was 10. He left me out there every night until I found him, and I was scared every night too. I had to learn to deal with my fear. I recognized this as true for myself as well. I don't think there's anywhere safe in Eagle View, I said. I think everyone is afraid there, not just us. This conversation made me think of Oriana and of my failure to save her amidst the fear of her family. I wondered how things might have been different if they'd ever been willing to allow me to help. Perhaps there would have been a way then. But they'd had little despite their stature, and they weren't willing to take any chances with my magic or anyone else's. An image of her flashed before me, her lips bloodied from her cough, the look of fear in her eyes as she struggled for breath. It made me hate them, not only her family, but the lawmen as well. I wondered who was controlling Zahn. Before Aaron had turned, she indicated that he was working on his own. I thought about the pool of light in the tower, and I wondered how often he drank from it. I would drink it dry. Despite my best intentions, I knew this was true. I wondered if there was any left. I think I should go look for food, Kenneth said. He glanced at Brennen. Can you keep an eye on him? I promise I won't be long. No way, I said. You're not leaving us. If we don't find something to bring with us, we'll starve before we ever make it to Eagle View. We flew for an hour. We don't know how many days away we are. Let me go, and I promise I'll come back if I run into any trouble. He tapped his club boot. You're a fool for going by yourself, I said. After all the guilt you've made me shoulder, how can you? I can do it if you can, he said. I'll be more careful. I looked over at Brennen, and I had to admit that the prospect of staying in that room was appealing. Perhaps we could just stay here until the end. Would it matter if we never made our way home? You'll starve here. Probably, but maybe it was time to get it over with. Maybe it was time to wait for Torin to come for me instead of running. Maybe we should, I said. Maybe we should just stay here and wait for him to finally show. Kenneth shook his head. We need to go back. You know that. You giving up your life to save everyone else isn't going to work. The people in your life who care about you won't let you, myself included. Now let me go. I crossed my arms. Fine, I'll give you 1 hour, but if you take any longer than that, Brennen and I will come after you. He opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. Whether I say it or not, we need you. It's barbaric, but I can't deny it's been helpful. I was still feeling guilty about the fact that I hadn't been able to take out Varric by myself. In fact, it had required brute force, something I wasn't sure my magic could equal. The level of hatred on Kenneth's face when he dealt that first blow was clear and pure. It was enough to scare me, maybe even more so than Varric had. Would we all end up that way? Fine, he said. I'll be back in an hour. You'll stay here if I disappear. I clenched my teeth, unwilling to answer, and watched as he left the room without a backward glance. I sat back on the sofa and pulled back the curtain, searching the skies for any threat. But Kenneth had been right. It appeared they were gone. It's a trick. I couldn't tell whether or not to believe this thought. So far, Torin had only sent others to track me down. Donovan, Phelan, and now Varric. Torin had done nothing more than me again and again, and he had succeeded. After all, he had been the one to take Quinn and Duna away from us. I knew that they would be used in some way against me, perhaps against us all. Still, army or no army, I felt that it would come down to just the two of us in the end. Maybe I should have left right then, turning myself over to the Wicks, running toward the inevitable end. Would that matter? And what if I were to fail? What if it turned out that the prophecy was wrong? Imagined what life might be like for everyone else if Torin proved able to kill me. He would take over everywhere, each kingdom, forcing them into a different kind of life. I imagined the looks on my father's and grandmother's faces if they were to be used by Torin. Somehow I felt that their lives would turn out to be much worse than those of others in Eagleview. I couldn't say how, but the truth of this thought came through. Torin was after me, and yet he had sent other people in his stead. It followed that he would use anyone I trusted against me. That included father and grandmother, maybe even Regan. As I stared out into the night, I saw no one, no Wicks or anyone else in the skies. Maybe Kenneth was right, and we should be on our way sooner than later. Either way, we were facing a danger few in our world had ever faced. I felt guilty for having allowed Brennen to come along with us, but while I considered him to be little more than a kid, he had begun to prove himself to us, and I considered that maybe that wasn't a fair assessment. As I waited for Kenneth to reappear, I watched as the moon slowly sank down to the horizon, frequently looking behind me, waiting for him to appear in the doorway. He didn't come. No one did. Soon I began to pace the room. How long had it been? Were the Wicks able to fly inside the castle? And if so, was he dead already? Fear began to overtake me as I imagined him sprawled upon the mosaic floor, ruining it even further. I walked to the door up against the wood, but I heard nothing. No footsteps, no screaming, no sign of him at all. Finally, as the sun began to rise, he burst through the door, a triumphant look upon his face. "You'll never guess what I found," he said, smiling widely. He had a small bag, and he walked to the bed and dumped out its contents. For a moment, I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but as the reality sunk in, I knew I would need to be stronger now than ever before, because in front of me, clanking as there were no fewer than 10 vials of light. My eyes grew wide, and I looked up at him, hoping desperately that he had an answer for me. What I needed in that moment was for someone to believe that I could do what I needed to, that I could keep away from this particular elixir. "Where did you get all that?" Brennen said, and I whipped around, having forgotten his presence in the room. He was surprised, and he crawled down to the base of the bed and made to swipe for one of them. "Hey now," Kenneth said, "we're going to need these if we intend to make it to Eagleview. I don't know about you, but I didn't see much in the way of grassland on our way here. In fact, it looked pretty desolate. This is our ticket." I took a deep breath, letting it go, thinking hard. What would I do now? Kenneth took the vials and put them into the outer pocket of his traveling pack. "We'll save it," he said. "Hand it over." He held out his hand toward Brennen. Reluctantly, and without taking out the stopper, he passed it. He looked miserable. "I'm hungry," he said defensively. "Not as hungry as you'll be on our journey." He stuffed the last vial in beside the others, the glass clinking. "I think this might be enough to get us there," he said to me. "What do you think?" He was asking the wrong person, but how could he know? How could he know that at the earliest opportunity I would try to steal it away? He doesn't know, and he doesn't need to. The lie I'd been telling myself for the past several days floated to the distance. With every day that passed, I was getting farther and farther away from the truth of what had been happening, from the truth of what I had done. I'd been trying to negotiate with myself, convincing myself that I would be okay without light. But I didn't mean it. I didn't believe it. Not for a moment. Okay, let me share the other screen. Take a look at my outline. Open quote. Where did you find all these? Question mark, close quote, I asked, period. I couldn't believe he'd managed it, period. New line, open quote. There was a group of chambers down one of the longest hallways, comma, close quote, he asked. Said, period. Open quote. I was able to get inside one of them, comma, but it was enchanted, period, close quote. He held out his arm, comma, and I could see the vestiges of a terrible burn mark as it healed, period. Open quote. I needed to take a sip, comma, quote, he said, period. Open quote. It was terrible, semicolon. Just stepping foot into that room was enough to get me running out of it again, period. Luckily, comma, there was a large armoire chest just outside the door, period. These, period. Close quote, new line, open quote. And that was all? Question mark, close quote, I asked, period. Open quote. 10 full vials of light? Question mark, close quote, new line. He shrugged, period, open quote. There were some other things, comma, too, comma, but they looked terrible, period. So, comma, after learning about light from you, comma, I focused on carrying just these, period. What do you think? Question mark, close quote, new line. Open quote. I think we should go back, comma, close quote, I said, period. Open quote. We don't know what the other ones undo. We don't know what the other vials might hold, period. Close quote. New line. Truly, comma, I was hoping that he'd been mistaken, period. Maybe there was more to be found in that strange, comma, enchanted room, period. New line, open quote. Are you sure? Question mark. Close quote, he asked, period. Open quote. I know I succeeded this time, comma, but we don't know what's out there, period, close quote, new line. I glanced out the window, comma, watching the sun rise over the castle, period. Open quote. The Wicks are gone, comma, close quote, I said, period. Open quote. I think we should investigate, comma, look for anything that might be useful for us in the castle, period. Then, comma, we can head out as soon as the sun sets, period. How's that? Question mark, close quote, new line, quote. I want to see what else is there, comma, close quote, Brennen said, period. Open quote. New line, open quote. But you won't be able to get inside, comma, close quote, Kenneth said, period, open quote. Not without hurting yourself, period. This was no small burn, semicolon. Only the light had been enough to heal my skin, period. Close quote, new line. I tried not to think poorly of him, comma, but I couldn't help being angry that he'd drained an entire vial, period. New line. Shouldn't it all be for me? Question mark. New line. Open quote. No. Let's get out of here, comma, close quote, I said, period. Open quote. Find what we can, period. Maybe there was more back in those rooms, period, close quote, new line. Kenneth shrugged, period. Open quote. If you say so, period. But I don't want us blowing through all this light just because we got greedy, period. Close quote, new line. This irked me, comma, even though I knew it, period. New line. Who was he to question me? Question mark. New line. This was an arrogant thing to think, comma, but I thought it nonetheless, period. I could do things that neither of them could manage, comma, and I felt certain I'd be able to gain access to those rooms, period. New line. Open quote. My dogs keep walking up to the door. Just like, sorry, I'm having trouble concentrating. Luckily, they're not jumping up on it at this point. I don't think that will happen, comma, close quote, I said, period. Open quote. I just want to investigate, period, close quote, new line. Brennen quickly jumped out of the bed and put on his traveling pack, period. Kenneth followed suit, comma, and a few moments later, comma, all of us were out the door, period. New line. I considered getting down on all fours again, creeping our way through the castle, period. But Kenneth seemed unconcerned, period. He walked upright, comma, seeming certain that there was no danger left at all, period. New line. It took us 10 minutes to reach the other side of the castle, comma, so he was, period. It was dark inside, comma, and I wondered how Kenneth had made his way to those particular rooms, period. New line. Then, comma, I saw it, period. In a holder, high up, undo, as tall as my head, comma, sat a torch, comma, still alight. Since the last time it had been used, period. It made me think of the fire in the grate back in the room, period. Had this been Varick's magic question mark? New line. Kenneth didn't wait, comma, semicolon. He grabbed for the torch, comma, then passed it to me, period. New line, open quote. Since you're the one with magic, comma, I think it makes sense for you to carry the light, period. Torch. Close quote, new line. I didn't disagree, comma. So I took the torch from him, comma, holding it out in front of me as we took slow steps toward the room that he was talking about. Chambers he was talking about, period. New line. Deep in the castle, comma. The sunlight didn't come through, period. In fact, comma, each room that we passed by was windowless, period. I couldn't imagine why, comma, I thought that the rooms had been used for the most unsavory of purposes, period. But when I looked inside, comma, I didn't find any bodies on the floor, period. Perhaps they had all been transferred down to the dungeons in the end, period. New line. It didn't take long after that for us to reach an open doorway, comma, the chest undo, semicolon. The chest Kenneth had described was situated just behind the last in the hall, period. We'd made it, period. New line. Maybe there's more light inside, period. New line. But then I looked over at Kenneth, comma, investigating the skin on his arm, comma, just barely healed, period. New line. I felt certain what we were about would not be easily accomplished, period. New line. We came to a stop in front of the door, comma, and Kenneth turned, period. New line. Open quote. I don't know what else you think you're going to find, comma, close quote, he said, period. Open quote. But I suppose this light, would be enough to heal you, if need be, period. I'd rather take it with us, comma, though, period, close quote, new line. This wasn't a bad idea, period, semicolon. Part of me knew that he was right, comma, that we should escape while we had the chance and only use the light in the most dire of circumstances, period. New line. But my curiosity was getting the better of me, period. Comma. And I ignored him, period. I walked right up to the opening, comma, then reached out toward the chest, period. New line. I looked back at Kenneth, comma, noting that the air wasn't hurting me at all, period. New line, open quote. Why isn't it burning like you said? Question mark, close quote. I added. New line. He looked confused, period. Open quote. I don't know, period. I thought it was enchanted. Semicolon. Period. This burn was no joke, period. Close quote. New line. An idea was starting in my mind, comma. The idea that maybe I was immune to this type of enchantment, period. Carefully, comma, I took one full step into the room, period. Behind me, Kenneth gasped, period. New line, open quote. You're being stupid, comma, close quote, he said frankly, period. Open quote. You don't know what you're getting into, period. You're M dash. Close quote. Close quote. But undo. He couldn't deny the fact that stepping into the room didn't hurt me at all, period. New line, open quote. Maybe it's because I have magic, comma, close quote, I said, period. I took several more steps, comma, turning around and taking the room in, period. I'd thought that Varric had been sleeping in the last room, comma, and that was still a possibility, period. But this place, comma, it was undoubtedly guarded, comma, not by him, then someone else, period. Period. New line. New line. I walked to the far end of the room, comma, and what I saw there made my heart leap, period. It wasn't more light, comma, but a staff, period. It had been several weeks since I'd held one, comma. These most dangerous weapons to any sorcerer, period. New line. Suddenly, comma, I wondered if Varric had also been unable to gain entry into this room, period. That thought didn't make much sense, comma, as he clearly had magic of his own, period. So why me? Question mark. New line. It's a trap, period. It's been set for you by Torin, period. New line. I knew this was a possibility, comma, even a likelihood, period. But as I turned around, comma, searching for more light, comma, I found instead a pile of gold stacked up upon a side table, period. I glanced back at Kenneth, comma, then made for it, period. New line. He started to argue, comma, but then he saw what I did, period. His eyes widened, comma, surely imagining what such wealth could buy in somewhere, like Eagle View, period. New line. Or maybe their kingdom, period. Maybe somewhere far away from the fight, period. New line. For a moment, comma, he put one foot through the doorway, comma, but he quickly pulled it back again, period, comma, hissing at the pain and gripping onto his calf, period. New line, unquote. Why won't it let us in? Question mark, close quote, he asked, period. Open quote. You're in there, period. I know you have magic, comma. So can't you remove the enchantment? Question mark, close quote. New line. Open quote. I don't know, comma, close quote, I said, comma, stuffing my pockets with gold coins, period. Open quote. Did you see anything else when you were in here? Question mark, close quote. I opened the drawer in the table. Comma. Search for any other treasures that might be hidden there, period. New line. I was not disappointed, period. New line. In the drawer was a small cache of gemstones, period. I picked one up, comma, a red ruby, comma, and held it up to the fire of the torch, period. New line. I tried to imagine what a simple stone like this might purchase, period. New line. We would be rich in just about any kingdom or city, period. New line. Not in Eagle View, period. New line. No, period. We would need to hide these riches before we entered the city, period. If what I was expecting was true, comma, thinking, We could expect to be imprisoned upon our arrival, period. I would be lucky to hang on to this staff, period. I held out a handful of gemstones to him, comma, showing them what I'd found, period. New line. Kenneth stood at the doorway, comma, nervously moving back and forth, comma, perhaps waiting for me to cry out in pain, period. New line. But there was no pain, comma, only treasure, period. New line, open quote. Did you see any other light when you were in here? Question mark, close quote. New line. He stopped pacing, period. Open quote. No, comma. But I couldn't get all the way inside now, could I? Period, close quote, new line. I would love it if you would come out of there, period. There. What you have is enough, comma, isn't it? Question mark. Is it worth risking your life yet again? Question mark. Close quote. New line. I understood. Undo. I recognized the truth in his words, comma, but it was difficult to tear my eyes away from the many things held in that space, period. New line. Finally, comma, though, comma, when I heard Brennen's voice, comma, I knew I needed to leave the rest of it behind, period. New line. I walked to the doorway, comma, holding out the gemstones and dropping them into his waiting hand, period. New line, open quote. I'll come out, comma, close quote, I said, period, open quote. But there's more here, period. Close quote, new line, open quote. The last time I checked, comma, one couldn't survive by eating rocks alone, period. Comma, close quote, he said, period. New line. Brennen reached up and took a couple of the gemstones from Kenneth's hand, period. He held one up as I had, comma, investigating it, period. New line, open quote. I wonder if it has magic, comma, too, comma, close quote, he said, period. Then, comma, after getting a good hard look, comma, he slipped it into his pocket, period. Them. Open quote. New line, open quote. I don't think you should be the one carrying these, comma, close quote, Kenneth said, period. Comma. A surprisingly angry look on his face, period. New line, open quote. And why not? Question mark, close quote, Brennen said, period. New line, open quote. We don't need to argue about this, comma, close quote, I said, period. Defensively. Open quote. Each of us should take a few, period. We don't know if we'll be split up again, period. Quote, new line. Wheel. New line. Kenneth glared at me, period, open quote. Seems to me you're the one who's usually leaving us behind, period, close quote, new line. I crossed my arms, period, open quote. That's not fair, period. You've been gone for hours, period. How is that different? Question mark, close quote, new line. His face fell, comma, and he shrugged, period, new line, open quote. What, comma, just before, because you're a man, question mark, close quote, I asked, period, new line. I was surprised when he laughed, period. Oh, you're calling me a man, question mark. I'm 16, period, close quote, new line, open quote. I don't think that matters in a time of war, period. None of us are kids anymore, comma, not even him, period, close quote. I gestured toward Brennen, comma, and he stood up tall, comma, taking it as a compliment, period. New line, open quote. Well, comma, I think we should M dash, close quote, close quote. And asked you, comma, close quote. Kenneth snapped, new line. Open quote. But she just said, comma, close quote, he said, period. Open quote. We are all adults now, period. Close quote, new line. I smiled at this, comma, recognizing the silliness of this period. But I couldn't deny that he had been the one who'd eventually saved us from Varric, period. He deserved respect, comma, even though he was still so young, period. New line. Open quote. Maybe let us do the navigation, comma, close quote, I said carefully, period. Open quote. But you're right, period. Each of us should get a say in in decisions like these, period. Close quote. Tell me, comma, what do you propose? Question mark. Close quote, new line. Brennen raised his chin, comma. An action undo. A comical action, given his height. Period. Open quote. I say we leave as soon as the sun sets. Period. We haven't seen Wicks for hours, comma, and the light will only hold us over for so long. Period. Close quote. New line. I shrugged, comma, staring at Kenneth. Period. Open quote. He's not wrong, comma, close quote, I said. Period. New line. Open quote. Fine, close quote, Kenneth said. Period. Open quote. But I lead. Period. Close quote. New line. Open quote. I won't argue with that, comma, close quote, I said. Period. I turned to Brennen. Period. Open quote. We will still need you to forage. Period. It makes sense that you go last. Period. Close quote. New line. Brennan's face fell, comma, but he nodded in agreement. Period. New line. And so the deal was struck. Period. We would leave at sunset, comma. Semicolon. I just hoped the skies would stay empty. Period. Chapter break. Period. Open quote. 8 hours later, comma, we found ourselves slinking through the square, trying to avoid the many skeletons that littered the cobblestones. Period. We didn't speak, comma, just walked toward the gate. Period. Comma, wide open for unknown. For how long, comma, none of us knew. Period. New line. I was just about to take a step through it when Kenneth grabbed onto my shoulders and pulled me around. Period. He looked up at the opening warily. Period. Open quote. New line. Open quote. I think we should be careful here, comma, close quote, he said. Period. Open quote. What if Varric has enchanted the exit as well? Period. It might be quite an escape. Period. Close quote. He looked down at Brennen, comma, his face concerned. Period. Open quote. We need undo. New line. I looked up at him, comma, so tall now, comma, semicolon. It seemed like he'd grown several inches since I'd last seen him in Eagleview. Period. New line. You've changed in a lot of ways, comma, too. Period. New line. I wasn't sure I believed the idea that the exit was enchanted, as those rooms had been, comma. But I still held out my new staff, comma, lit the tip with fire, comma, and threw a bolt of power through the opening, period. New line. But it didn't make it through the opening, period. Instead, comma, it rebounded against some sort of air defense, period. Again, comma, I imagined Varric, comma, tried to figure out if he had been the one to enchant this particular part of the castle, period. New line. Somehow, comma, I doubted it, period. New line. Doubted. New line. Open quote. Okay, comma. You were right, comma, close quote, I said, period. New line. Open quote. I was hoping I was wrong, comma, close quote, he said, period, open quote. What do we do now? Question mark, close quote, new line. Open quote. I sat there for nearly a minute, comma, thinking hard, period. I was surprised, comma, though, comma, when Brennen stepped forward, period. New line, open quote. We'll need to find another way out, comma, simple as that, comma, close quote, he said, period. Open quote. New line. I wasn't sure about this idea, comma, but I supposed possibility that there could be a secret exit from the kingdom, period. New line, open quote. What do you think? Question mark, close quote, I asked, comma, turning to Kenneth, period. Open quote. I'm not sure I'll be able to take this down. Period, close quote. New line. He looked up at the top of the opening, where several jagged pieces of wood still hung down, period. Open quote. The question is, comma, how did Varric get inside? Question mark. Close quote. New line. In my memory, comma, I heard the cries of the Wicks, comma, and thought I had an idea, period. All right. I think I'm going to stop there. Thank you for joining me today. If you have any questions about this series or what I'm doing, you can go to or email me, jen@thehumanauthor.com. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Thanks for joining.